Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the channel. My name is Sam, and I like to talk about all things film, physical media. And today I am joined by a stalwart contributor of in the world of physical media, author of such books as Splintered Visions, about Lucio Fulci and his films, So Deadly, So Perverse, which I think has 3 volumes, 50 Years of Italian Giallo films. You've written a book on Mario Bava. I think that's called The Haunted World of Mario Bava. And you've also written a book on Umberto Lenzi as well. Make Them Die Slowly, the kinetic cinema of Umberto Lenzi. So I'm here with Troy. Thank you so much for coming onto the channel. And we're going to discuss your career, the things that you've been working on in the past that I'm a fan of and I just want to spotlight, and also maybe talk about a few things that have been announced that haven't come out yet that you could shed some light on, and just go from there.
Sure. Sounds good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, cool. So the first thing I like to ask people when they come onto the channel is, like, how did you get into this? So it's a very niche area of interest for people, and you get a lot of people asking other contributors, like, how do you get into it? So could you let me know, and also anyone listening or watching, like, how did you first break into this realm of film criticism, writing, appreciation?
Well, I guess it goes all the way back to when I was in college. I wrote my first book, The Haunted World of Mario Bava, which was not really intended to be a book at the time. The idea of writing a book, I just didn't think I had it in me. It wasn't something that I thought I would ever be able to do, but I thought it would be either a long, maybe multi-part article or a monograph, something like that. But a professor of mine had faith in me, I suppose, and encouraged me, and it became a project that I actually ended up getting some credit for throughout my college, which was a great help, great plus. It's always nice to get credit for writing about Mario Bava, and that one came out in 2002. So actually 2 years after I graduated, it finally came out. The original version from Fab Press in the UK. Sold very well. It did well. I had ideas at the time about other projects I wanted to do, but I just didn't. I didn't feel that I had the kind of enthusiastic support that I needed at the time to kind of cheer me on. And I probably just wasn't ready at that stage. So I actually, for many years, I focused on writing. I guess you could say sort of DVD reviews, things like that. I was never really a technical person as such. I'm not really the person to ask about, how many pixels and all that sort of, that's just not my thing. But I care about the films, and I'm very interested in the films, like talking about them. So writing reviews for various different websites kind of kept me busy for years. And then I got back in the saddle first by doing a revised version of The Haunted World of Mario Bava, and that led to a whole string of other books, some of which you listed. I guess my first kind of steps into the world of home video would have been in the early 2000s. I did liner notes for Media Blaster's release of What Have You Done to Solange? And I also did some notes for Arrow Video back then for things like Slaughter High and I think Maniac Cop. But that was pretty much as far as it went, was just liner notes. And then it wasn't until 2015 that I was finally approached to do my first commentary. And from there, it went over well. People seem to like it, and they keep asking me. So there you go.
Awesome. So when you started writing this book in college, what were you studying? Were you studying film at the time, or something completely different? Right.
We didn't really have a film program as such, although they did have a course you could take each year because it was a different slate of films. It was called Film as Literature,
okay.
Which is kind of ironic in the sense that I kind of rail against that a little bit these days. I think people tend to look at film too much as like an outgrowth of the novel, and so they focus a little too much on story, whereas that's not what films are always about. But I was principally focusing on writing, on literature, technically majored in humanities, which was just a kind of nice, broad, non-specific sort of a thing. that enabled me to kind of circumvent some of the courses I didn't really particularly want to take. So I didn't really have a particular end game in mind, in terms of my day-to-day life, in terms of what I do, in order to make ends meet, because as much as I love writing about film and doing commentaries, and they do pay, and it's nice to get a little bit of extra income. It's not enough in and of itself. So I have a day job. So I just got kind of ambled through really until I lucked onto something that was tolerable to do. But I didn't really have a particular end game at that time. I mean, truth be told, I really wanted to do was make films.
Sure.
I wanted to actually make films, and I just discovered that I didn't have the drive. I didn't have the personality, because the film industry has changed so much, even from 40 years ago. In the 80s until today, it's very different. It used to be more of a factory, where you hear these stories about some of these directors who went in starting out like as clapper boys and just kind of general runners on the set, and then would work their way up the ladder. That's not really how it's done now. And I just didn't have the personality for that. And who knows, maybe I just didn't have the talent too, but I certainly didn't have the drive, and I didn't have the confidence. So that never happened.
Yeah, I feel similarly. I mean, I've studied film, but in terms of doing anything with it, it's very, very challenging to get anywhere. Like, because I would ideally like to teach film, like theory or anything to do with that. But like, to get that, you need a PhD generally to get into that sort of level of teaching, because I'd like to teach university students. But the drive there for me is also not quite as what I'd like it to be. I can focus on small projects, like an essay or anything like a podcast or something like that. But like, I'm quite admire anyone who's able to sit down and write a book, which is something I keep intending to do on a certain subject I have a particular interest in. But it's just finding the time and motivation to be held accountable for it is really what I need. And if I'm the only one I'm held accountable to, I tend to let it slip. But the intention's always there.
Well, it's not only that too; it's the money. I mean, to get a PhD, to get a master's, anything is very expensive. I mean, obviously, you go for student loans and hopefully get scholarships and things like that. But my God, as expensive as things are anymore, you better be very serious about what you're doing. Otherwise, why bother? So once I did my 4-year degree, that was it for me. I said, no, I just never really saw a practical use for it. I'm not one of these people that just wanted to attach letters to my name as some sort of an ego trip kind of a deal. So, I mean, the world has changed a lot. I mean, the future in terms of what is going to happen with people going to college or university or whatever is very, very much up in the air, because a lot of employers are kind of changing their criteria with this realization that for a lot of people that just simply isn't feasible. So, I mean, and to say nothing of the fact too, some of the dumbest people I've ever known have had major degrees, and some of the most intelligent people I've ever known didn't go to college at all. So it doesn't necessarily, just because you call yourself doctor or you attach whatever string of letters, that doesn't necessarily mean anything. Some people are so smart, they're stupid.
I completely agree with that. There are various different levels of intelligence, and a lot of the time the intelligence that some people have is not that useful. So but I studied science as my undergrad, and then and then a number of years passed, and I just wanted to learn. So I did a master's degree in film studies, like in my spare time, because I just want to learn about film and stuff. And I really enjoyed my time, but I have a love-hate relationship with academia. It's very limiting on the sort of subjects that they like you to cover, and mainly because if they're not an expert or interested in the subject that at that university that you're at, there's not really any avenue for you to explore those things. So it's very challenging, but for the most part I really enjoyed my experience. But anyway, less about me, more about you. I wanted to talk about just some of the things that you've worked on in the past that I'm a big fan of. Now, you've written a book about Lucio Fulci. Now, Lucio Fulci is he's definitely within my top 10 directors of all time. And one of the films that I love by him that is sorely, I feel, underappreciated and lesser talked about amongst his work is a film called Beatrice Cenci. And you did an audio commentary on this one.
Yes.
Tell me about why you like Beatrice Cenci, and how did you come about doing an audio commentary? And were you approached about this one? Did you reach out? Like, how did it work for this particular release?
Yeah, Beatrice Cenci, or just Beatrice Cenci, whichever pronunciation you choose to go with. Beatrice is, technically correct with the Italian, but it depends on what you want to go with. Whatever's easier for you. No, that was quite a surprise. That was a very pleasant surprise. It kind of came out of the blue. I was approached by 88 Films to do it. I had, without wanting to get too much into detail, at that point, probably a couple of years prior, I had been approached by them to do a series of commentaries for their label. And unfortunately, they were working with an individual with whom I do not get along.
Okay.
And I kind of let it be known, well, that person may have a problem. I said, I don't have a problem. I can ignore it. But, just so you know, no, it's fine. And that ended up, unfortunately, not going very well. Only ended up doing one. The rest of them were kind of canceled because this other person, raised a bit of a fuss, and they didn't want to get involved. So, fortunately, a couple of years later, that relationship had ceased. And they came to me and asked me if I wanted to do it. And I said, well, yeah, I mean, as long as I have some assurance that that's not going to happen again, I have no problem. And they said yes. And they've been absolutely wonderful to work with since then. I did not expect that film at that time to be getting a nice kind of special edition. As you say, it's a term I try to avoid a little bit. People overuse underrated and overrated so viciously, it has no meaning. But I think it's true in this case. It's at least a neglected masterpiece in his body of work. He's made several, I'd say, truly great films, in addition to a number of films I'm very fond of, but several truly great films, of which this is one. And it's one of the movies he was really proud of. But because it's a sort of historical melodrama, it's not the type of film that the fans tend to go gaga over. So I didn't expect it to get that kind of a release. So I was very happy when it came my way. It is indeed, it's a terrific film. It's a period piece, but it's so far removed from a kind of stuffy period piece. It's very tactile. It's very visceral. It's sort of weirdly sensual in a way, but also very disturbing. And it's one of the relatively few movies I've ever seen that deals with kind of people in heavy period clothes, that really addresses how uncomfortable that must have been. These people are just plucking all the time at their clothes, and there's sweat dripping off their nose. The scene in the film where George Wilson as Francesco Cenci rapes his daughter, Beatrice, the detail that Fulci zeroes in on with the drop of sweat on the tip of the nose is so wonderfully sort of tactile and grotesque. And it's a very political film. It deals with a historical event that has been dramatized numerous times in numerous contexts. There have been plays. The playwright Antonin Artaud did a play of Beatrice Cenci, which makes sense that Fulci would be drawn to this, because Artaud was a playwright that he often referenced in the sort of so-called theater of cruelty. So movies like The Beyond and City of the Living Dead, he would often mention Artaud in that context. So it was a perfect project for him, but yet it was a movie that was very poorly received at the time. There was a lot of controversy. He claimed, now, of course, we can't always take everything Fulci says at face value. He liked to tell stories. But he claimed that there was a screening he attended where people were so upset that they were screaming, "Kill the director." I don't know if I believe that, but it's a good story. But it's a movie that is quite shocking in its way, but also a model of restraint compared to the types of films he would do later on. It doesn't get as grubby as something like The New York Ripper does, for example, but it's equally disturbing. And it's a movie that I think, obviously, again, he was very, very proud of. He tended to reference this movie and Don't Torture a Duckling as the two movies he was proudest of. And, well, I think he was right in that.
Speaking of Don't Torture a Duckling, this is maybe my favorite Fulci film.
Oh, yeah, mine too.
And you so happen to contribute on this one as well. Fulci, did the opportunities arrive after doing the Fulci book, or because you were also on this, which is an incredible disc as well, not just the film of being amazing, but like the actual transfer and presentation from Blue Underground on this is like absolutely exquisite. Like, did they like, how do these did they go, right, you've done one on several other Fulci films, we'll go to the Fulci expert? Is that how that goes? Because there are other people in like the space who are also very knowledgeable and have expertise on it. So how does it go? How does it work?
Well, first of all, it's never been my intention with any of these people, whether it's Fulci or Lenzi, because I think they in particular are the directors I've probably done the most commentaries on. I'd hate to be, and Argento, actually, to tell you the truth, done quite a few Argentos. I'd hate to be seen as like having monopoly, because I don't like that in general. Sometimes I don't mind.
But again, you don't want to turn down opportunities for the sake of not having a monopoly. You'll be like, oh, well, yes, I may have done several of these, but like,
yeah,
you don't want to get approached to do them. I'm not going to say no. Maybe let someone else do it. It's not how
you don't want to turn them down. I mean, I have turned down a few, believe it or not. I have in fact turned some things down, including at least one Fulci film I won't mention, because I don't want to make it seem like somebody else got it after I rejected it. That would be unkind. But no, when I think of like Christopher Frayling, for example, doing Leone's films, to me this makes perfect sense. A, because he knows what he's talking about, and B, he's really interesting to listen to. So I don't complain about that. But also other people have done it. So it's not like it's a complete monopoly. There's certain people who are associated with certain directors, and I guess that's the case with me, with Fulci, and with Lenzi in particular, and Argento. I think in general it happened because of the books. My first commentary offer came after So Deadly, So Perverse came out. I think after the first 2 volumes had come out. And they were kind of looking to bring new people on who hadn't been doing them. They had kind of the same core group of people for years, and they thought, well, maybe it's time to get some new voices in. And now I'm part of the older generation where they're probably thinking, well, we've had enough of this guy. Let's get in, which is fine. I think in the Giallo stuff, of course, they would come to me. Fulci I started getting a lot of offers for Fulci. Then the Lenzi book came out. Well, let's get the Lenzi guy. I've tried not to be fossilized in being just one thing. I mean, I like to do other films when I'm given a chance. But inevitably, they do tend to come to you based on things that you've written books about, which makes sense. So, lots of Fulci. I've done, I couldn't tell you exactly how many. I've done quite a few. Most of the big ones. Probably the big one that has escaped me is The Beyond. But other than that, I've done most of the other major ones at this point, and I'm always willing and eager to do more.
Awesome. So when you say you've turned things down, you don't have to say what you've turned down, but have you ever accepted a job on something where you've taken more of a stance of say a film historian and like done commentaries on stuff that you really didn't like the film too much, but you found like its making of interesting and the context behind like the times it was made and stuff like that? Because that can be, I like those sort of like commentaries or liner notes where it's not just always heaping praise on something, particularly when a film is glaringly has issues. It's not to say you can't like a film that has issues, but like when something is so overwhelmingly positive for something, I like those things. Like, could you give any examples where you maybe worked on something where you thought the film was fine or okay, but like you had to work on it, or you chose to work on it because of various different other things that you found interesting about them?
I only do masterpieces like Giallo in Venice. One of the great films of all time. No, I've talked about this before with our mutual friend Eugenio Ercolani, who I know you've interviewed as well, and it's not our function. I think some people seem to think this. I find it rather irritating when people do this, but it's not our function to be cheerleaders for the films. We're there to contextualize, to give background. Yeah, sure, to give personal opinion, subjective opinion, and that sometimes means that you say, I don't really like this one that much. I got to be honest with you. I would never accept something that I didn't think I could bring something to. I have been offered some big films, actually some very distinguished big films that I was scared off of because of the subject matter or the running time. There was a film one time that was a 4-hour film. I was offered a good chunk of money to do that. No, I couldn't do. I wouldn't want to subject somebody to that, so I turned it down. Another film that I really, really like, but it was like, I don't think I'm the right person for this, so I turned it down. And sometimes that pains you because you think, oh, there's so much I could talk about, but you think, there's somebody out there who could do better. So I don't have a problem accepting films off the top of my head. I mean, I mentioned Giallo in Venice, which is a very grubby late 70s Giallo. And the reason I thought that would be an interesting film to do is to talk about the desperation that the genre was in, and indeed the film industry was in at that period of time. 1979, we're talking about, on the cusp of the 1980s, the collapse of the Italian film industry, thanks to the stranglehold of television on the public. Desperation to get people to go see things that they couldn't see on TV. Well, you couldn't see a movie like Giallo in Venice on TV, that's for sure. And so I thought, it could be an interesting film to talk about. I've thought, just to throw it out there as an example, I would have no problem whatsoever doing a commentary for Dario Argento's Dracula, which I think is his worst film. And I wouldn't sit there and just talk about it. Oh, it's wonderful. I know, I think it's terrible. But I think to talk about what it is, why it is, and everything else could be really interesting.
Yeah, for sure.
I have no problem with that whatsoever.
Yeah, good. Talk about a few more releases that I've enjoyed. This is a very recent one that you've contributed a couple of commentaries for, and it may we're approaching the end of the year. People in this space, physical media and stuff, like to make end of year lists, best of lists of things that they've enjoyed that have come out from different labels across the year. And for me, one of my favorite box sets of the year is the Forgotten Giallo volumes 7. These films, Mystère and Sweets from a Stranger. So you contributed commentaries on these ones. I don't know which one I like more, but these are such interesting films. I hadn't seen them. So I'm fairly versed in Giallo. These are very atypical. I find for the genre, particularly this one. This one has a real sort of social commentary and real maybe sympathy for sex workers and stuff in the film, intertwining some more salacious material in there. So it's contrasting there with what it's doing. But I found these films very surprisingly good. For a Forgotten Giallo, I'd never heard of them, and when they're presenting to you in these box sets with all these special features and stuff, I love getting discoveries like this, and it's few and far between for me nowadays when I'm sort of things are coming out. Either I've heard of it or I've seen it, and when I do see things that I haven't heard of, they're usually interesting or I enjoy them, but rarely do things like this pop up that are in my wheelhouse that I'm really sort of in love with. So could you tell us more about Mystère and Sweets from a Stranger? And you worked with Eugenio on these, as you seem to have a very good working relationship with him as well as Nathaniel Thompson and stuff. Before going into that, how did that come about? Because you seem to collaborate very frequently, and I find all of the audio commentaries, because every single disc that I have that you're on, I've listened to them all because I'm a bit of a nut to consuming things. I love almost as much as watching films. I love listening and talking to people about films. So but when I'm listening to a good commentary, I feel like I'm in the room with the people. It's almost like a podcast, or I'm watching a conversation or an interview on TV or something like that. And you guys always have that back and forth and stuff where it's very well researched and just really good, thoughtful analysis and things like that. So yeah, anyway, what do you think of these films? I was just rambling a bit there.
I thank you. It was very kind rambling, so I appreciate it when somebody tells me A, that they enjoyed it. That means a lot, and B, when they say that they feel like it's a conversational. That's what I like to hear, because that's what I want it to be. I never want them to be stuffy sort of lectures. I don't like to make it just sound like I'm at a podium delivering a lecture. I want to make it sound as if I'm talking to you about the film and pointing out things that are interesting. And I don't know. That's the approach I like. There are different approaches, whatever, but that's what I tend to like. So I appreciate you saying that. Well, the three films in that set, there's one I didn't do, which is Pathos, which is a very strange film, probably the strangest film in the set. Yeah. And I mean, it's just one of those things. We've been collaborating a great deal, Eugenio and I and Nathaniel. And sometimes I think, well, maybe, I don't want to be on every single one. Nathaniel doesn't want to be on every single. So kind of figure out, well, I'd rather do this one. I'd rather do that one. I mean, theoretically, we could have done all three of these films, but, it worked out the way that it worked out. So in the beginning, I worked alone. My first track was recorded in December of 2015. And until 2019, I always worked alone. So I did a lot of tracks completely solo, which is a very different experience to doing with other people. When you work alone, you can prepare more of a script. You can, now I wouldn't recommend over scripting it, although again, individual mileage will vary. Some people like to script down to the pause. Everything is scripted. I like to be a little more freewheeling, but you can script it a little more and structure it a little more carefully when you're by yourself. When you're with other people, you don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what other people are going to say. You just kind of bounce off each other and hopefully keep a kind of conversational flow. So in 2019, I was asked by Walt Olson, who has since passed away. He was the head of Scorpion, to do a commentary for Conquest, Lucio Fulci film. And I thought, well, boy, that's going to be a tough one. I want to do it, but it's a strange movie. I don't know if I can film 90 minutes of this. And then I thought, well, let's ask Nathaniel if he'd like to do it. And it went so well. I thought we just had such a good rapport. He's such one of the truly nice people in the world. I mean, I have a sort of sparky personality that can rub people the wrong way, and not everybody likes me, and I understand this. I'm opinionated, and I can definitely, sometimes be a little tricky. I'm sure Nathaniel's one of the most laid back people. I mean, he's a complete sweetheart of a human being. So we got along so well, and that just flowed, and we continued working together since that time. Then Eugenio came into the fold. I'm not even entirely sure. I think around 2021, 22, something like that. And well, let's be honest, he has an added advantage in the sense that he's a producer. So he's able to get us on the ground floor. So it's always, this is coming up. Do you want to work on it? Yeah, of course. Again, sometimes, I don't think so. I don't have the time, or I don't have the interest, or whatever. But yeah, it's a good kind of chemistry, I think. I don't make a point of listening to the tracks when they're done too much, but I've been trying to do it a little more lately, because sometimes I find it's beneficial to break me of certain bad habits. There's certain expressions and things you fall back on to kind of fill dead air and realize, oh, I say that too much. I got to stop saying that. Yeah. So that helps. And not to sound immodest, but every now and again I listen. I think, we're not bad. We do pretty good. I mean, I'm not somebody who likes to praise myself, but every now and again I'll listen to something. Like I listened to the track that Nathaniel and I did for opera, for example, and I thought, good. I'm actually happy with this. I wouldn't change this. So that's a nice feeling. There it is. Beautiful addition from Seven.
Very nice. Very nice.
But to go back to Volume 7 of Forgotten Giallo. Well, first of all, I think the sets have improved tremendously over time. I was in on the very first one. I don't remember what year it was, but that was one of those weird things where they had like Spanish movies in there. And I'm like, I'm a purist. Some people will mock that, but I tend to think that a Giallo has to be an Italian film, or at least primarily Italian film. So some of those films, I was like, I don't know. They're not really Giallo films. And other ones, I'm like, really? Forgotten? I don't think Autopsy
No, I agree with that. Yeah.
My Dear Killer, things like that. I was like, I don't think they're forgotten. So the sets have gotten more interesting, and certainly I think 7 was the most interesting on the level that these are indeed 3 true Giallo films from the 1980s during a very transitionary period. They're odd films, all 3 of them. They're very unusual, and they're not well known. So that to me was like, yeah, this is perfect. This is what this set should be, assembling films like this. And I can't give you titles, but I do know what's going to be coming in the next couple of sets, and I think people will be excited about that too. They've got some interesting ones on the docket, I can tell you that. But as far as the movies in the set go, I like Sweets from a Stranger best myself. That's the only movie that Franco Farini's ever directed. He discusses why in the extras. Obviously, he's the screenwriter, worked a lot with Dario Argento throughout the, from the 80s onward, pretty much.
Yeah.
And a movie that deals with the world of sex workers, and kind of gives a Giallo-like spin on it. It reminds me a little bit of M, the Fritz Lang film from the 30s.
Yeah, that's fun. Yeah.
And I mean, it's, I think, a very interesting kind of compassionate film. It's not terribly seedy. It's not very exploitative. It's not very gory. And on that level, I'm afraid a lot of people are probably going to say, oh, it's boring. I like it, though. I think it's a really interesting character piece. Mystere is an interesting one. That's a weird kind of fusion of Giallo and almost feels like a little bit like a James Bond kind of glow.
I was going to say that. It's got that, obviously, the spy film genre was very popular. Like probably a couple of decades earlier. Yeah, exactly. So
Carol Bouquet from For Your Eyes Only. So yeah, it feels a little bit like a fusion of those things, and it's fun. It's enjoyable. But again, for a movie that deals with a high class call girl, it's not very seedy. It's not very super gory. But again, the truly weird one in the set is Pathos, which is this kind of vaguely science fiction, also sort of, in a way, sort of queer-friendly film. Very strange, very, very unusual for the period it was made. You can tell it's a movie that had big ambitions, but it got a bit compromised along the way. So an interesting group of films.
I agree. Now, I am in have very, very good taste in film because I'm a huge Jess Franco fan.
Of course.
That was tongue in cheek, by the way, if who was listening didn't realize. But you contributed to this. And the Marquis de Sade's Philosophy in the Boudoir, or Eugenie, if you want to call it by its shorter name. And I was very pleased that you contributed to this one because I'm in a minority amongst my friends who are in like the film community and who I talk to. I pretty much have all of the Severin Franco released films, and I've basically anything that's like been out on Blu-ray. I have Franco because I'm just obsessed with the individual. I think he's a really fascinating man, so prolific. It's a joke. This is a Blue Underground do some of the best 4K presentations in the market. I'm always high praise them. Tell us about Marquis de Sade's Philosophy in the Boudoir, and did they reach out to you for this one? This is a collaboration audio commentary. You did this one with Nathaniel, right?
Yeah, Nathaniel and I did that one.
Yeah.
Actually,
are you a big Franco fan?
Oh God, yes. Oh God, yes. Yes, I am. I think all of my Franco commentaries, except for the very first one, which I did alone, was The Killer Barbies, which is one of his later films. Not a great film, although an interesting one. They've all been with Nathaniel, but I did just do one with Eugenio. I can't say what it is or what label, but it'll be coming. So that was a slightly different chemistry there. There are many, many, many better filmmakers than Jess Franco, but if I covet the career and the life of any one filmmaker, it's Jess Franco. Everything I hear about this man and his life and the way that he made films, I covet that life. I covet living with Lena Romay too. I'm sorry, I'm just going to go there. But
me too.
Oh my goodness, a fortunate man. This is not a conventionally handsome man, so he was quite fortunate there. But what an incredible career! What an incredibly worked with big people, Orson Welles and Christopher Lee, Klaus Kinski. Really interesting. but also did these incredibly grimy little grubby, let's rent out a hotel room and shoot a quick porno movie real quick kind of thing. Very, very weird career. He's all over the place. I'm not one of these Franco nuts that says that every single Franco film is wonderful and it rises above any kind of, it's all part of the mosaic and you can't, no, come on. I mean, some of them are awful. Some of them are awful. But the best ones, my God, they're amazing. Venus and Furs, one of my 10 favorite films ever made. I love that film. So as far as Philosophy in the Boudoir or Eugenita's Story of Her Journey into Perversion is concerned, I have a very good relationship with Blue Underground that really kind of goes all the way back to their Blu-ray release of Manhattan Baby, whatever year that was. I did the liner notes for that. And then I kind of snuck in at the 11th hour when I found out they were doing Stendhal Syndrome on Blu-ray. They weren't planning on a commentary. I said, would you be interested? And they said, well, if you can do it, pretty quickly, absolutely. So since that time, we worked in tandem on quite a few projects. Even Bill Lustig, the head of the company, has been very kind, made some kind comments about some of the things I've done commentaries for, including one of his own films, incidentally, Vigilante.
Nice. Yeah.
So that was nice. But yeah, I mean, they're very good at sort of reaching out to me and saying, we're working on this, we're working on that. Are you interested? And yeah, sure. I mean, I've done a lot of stuff for them. They've done a lot of Franco releases at this point on 4K, which just kind of blows my mind that there's a bunch of Jess Franco movies.
Who'd have thunk it?
Well, I can remember being in the 90s when I first started really getting into this stuff, picking up a book called Obsession, the films of Jess Franco, which was kind of the first English language book devoted to Franco. And you read through this book and it was like, it just seems so seedy and forbidden. Like, I'm never going to see these movies. Something like Lorna the Exorcist, I'm never going to see this thing. Well, it's on Blu-ray now. Isn't that amazing? Yeah. So he's pretty well represented on Blu-ray and indeed 4K at this point, which I'm very grateful for. Philosophy in the Boudoir, I think, is one of his best movies. I think it's one of his best made. It's part of that group of Harry Alan Towers films that he made in the late 60s. I've done most of them at this point, actually, except Venus and Furs hasn't been released because there's some copyright issues, unfortunately, there. But it's a beautiful adaptation of Desaad, slightly watered down as it would need to be. If you've read the source material, you'll understand why. But still pushing the envelope pretty far for 1969. Yep. And of course, the movie that infamously Christopher Lee said he was tricked into doing, he had no idea. Wow, I don't believe that. I think he knew. I just didn't think he thought it would get exposure anywhere where he would be embarrassed. But he had no reason to be embarrassed because he's very good in the film, and the film is nothing to be ashamed of.
Totally agree. Speaking of Christopher Lee, Whipping the Body, Mr. Mario Bava. You contributed to this one. This is maybe, I don't like saying which is my favorite, but this is a contender for my favorite Bava film because of, I don't know, the material is just more up my street, and Dario Lavi is just so utterly gorgeous in the film. 88 Films reached out to you for this one again?
Yeah, they did. I was overjoyed when they told me that, they'll send me every now and again like a list of things they're working on and say, do you want to do any of these? And I'll snag up anything that I want. They will put sometimes 2 commentaries on releases, and I'm never aware. I kind of wish I was, so that there could be some kind of attempt to sort of figure out if I should take a different approach or whatever, but it seems to work out okay. But yeah, when they told me they were doing it, I said, well, I want to do it. I said, but I'm really hoping this is going to be a new scan because the previous version that was available looked horrible. It just looked horrible. And they said, no, we found another print and it's not good enough for a 4K release, but we're doing a new scan and we'll even have you look at it, which was great. And as soon as I saw it, even in a low res version, I said, oh my goodness. I'm very proud to be a part of this one. So that scan has since been used, imported by Kino for their upgraded Blu-ray release. They didn't import the extras, but they use that scan. So at least you can see it the way it's supposed to be now. It's one of my favorites of his too. Absolutely. And it's a movie that I know Christopher Lee was very proud of as well.
When I was just reading the back here, you and various other different audio commentary people and like liner note contributors, you have different labels about who you are and what you are. So on this one, it says you're a cinema expert. And then on I don't know who writes these things. I mean, and then other ones you have like genre expert or film critic or film historian. Like how would you describe yourself? Just a film enthusiast or like
film,
do you not want to be labeled? Just film is me.
Film critic, writer. Just call me writer. That's good enough.
Okay.
I always sort of wince a bit when they call me a film historian, because I'm from a very small town in Pennsylvania. I'm not. I don't have easy access to archives. I don't have the opportunity to kind of go into various different, universities and studios and archives and things. I feel like I haven't earned that. I'm a fan. I'm an enthusiast, whatever you want to call it. Writer is good enough. Usually when they say, how do you want to be credited? I would just say writer, but they'll call me all kinds of weird things. Film. Some of them call me film journalist. I'm not a journalist. I don't know where you get this from, but okay.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Now we've spoken about a few of the things that I've enjoyed. This is just a small slice, of the things. So I couldn't talk about everything. But just thank you for all the work that you've done on all these discs, because some of these are my favorite films, and I really enjoy your work on this stuff. So now we're going to talk about a few things that have been announced that are going to be coming out in the future, and we can talk about those. I'll just bring something up on the screen. Hopefully you'll be glad to see it. Can you see that?
Yep.
So this one is technically out now, but I don't know if any people have actually received this yet, because this came available during the Black Friday sale for Severin. Obviously, you're an expert and written a book about the director of this film. I don't believe the previous Severin release had an audio commentary on it, so this is brand new. Giving some context with your good friend Nathaniel, obviously without spoiling the commentary, because we all want to listen to it without any spoilers and stuff. You could tell us about how this came about and stuff.
That one, if I remember correctly, was a situation where there was some rumbling that it was coming, and I reached out to David at Severin and said, if you're doing this, if you'd like a commentary, let me know. And he said, yeah, sure, you can do it. That's how it sometimes happens. Sometimes it's because you hear that something's coming. You say, well, wait a second, I'd like to work on this if you'll have me. Sometimes they approach you, and it just depends. It's probably it's certainly Lenzi's grubbiest film up until that time. It managed to be topped subsequently by Cannibal Ferox, which is the probably the more accomplished film on the whole. But this is probably the only cannibalized cannibal movie. It's mostly most of the atrocious stuff in the film. Actually, all of the atrocious stuff in the film is actually from other movies.
Yeah.
So he does not actually do any of the awful kind of animal violence in this film, but there is violence. It comes from Mountain of the Cannibal God or Slave of the Cannibal God, Jungle Holocaust, etc. Man from Deep River, which is Lenzi's first kind of a cannibal film, but it was more of an adventure movie with cannibalism into it. This is a full-blown exploitation movie, and he's not listed on the front. As a matter of fact, it's funny because really the technical billing on this film would be very different, but I guess they picked popular names now among cult fans. But the American actor Mel Ferrer is in this film, which is funny because he was also in Tobe Hooper's Eaten Alive as well.
Well, that's a nice bit of trivia. So I'm in two minds about the cannibal cycle. I find that everything surrounding them absolutely fascinating. Cannibal Holocaust is one of my all-time favorite films. But I also despise it in a way. It's a very odd dichotomous relationship I have with certain movies where some of the content in it is just deplorable, but I'm just so fascinated by it, and parts of the film just work for me. But anyway, so Eaten Alive, I like this film, but this is one I want to pick up because you have an audio commentary on it. Then things like that I can pick up discs if I like the film or I want to learn more about it. Then I'll pick up discs for special features. So I'm excited to get this one in my hands eventually when I get it from Severin. Next up is a very big one. I'm very, very, very excited about this. I have on should be on the way to me at the moment the Houses of Doom box set from Cauldron. So I haven't actually had the chance to watch that one yet, but it's being sent to me. But you worked on that one, and now you're working on this next one of Lamberto Bava films. Yeah, so please, you've got 2 commentaries. There's 4 films in this box set, and you're doing commentaries on 2 of them. But could you just tell us about the box set in general? And just seems to be Cauldron are just pulling out all of these, really underseen films from like very popular, genre film directors, Italian genre film directors.
Well, all these films, the ones you mentioned, Houses of Doomed or Damned Houses, whatever you want to call them, and these have in common they're made for TV movies. Yeah. Now, this one, of course, has the unifying presence of Lamberto Bava, who by the late 80s, after Demons and Demons 2, he kind of transitions more into directing television films. Which kind of undercut his cinema career in a way, and kind of made him be seen a little bit as a little bit down market by some people. But he had an extraordinary success directing TV, especially the Cave of the Golden Rose fantasy films in the 90s, made him a very wealthy man. So he's certainly not been hurting. The other 4 films that you referenced, the Doomed Houses, those were they were made for TV by men who didn't understand anything about television. So they were incredibly violent. And it was like nobody bothered to brief them and say, you can't do this on television. Yeah. So the films were made and then they were shelved. And I think they were essentially like tax write-offs after a certain point. Nothing was done with them. They really weren't shown on TV. These films were, and we see Giallo in the title. We shouldn't assume that these are kind of mystery films. Of the 4 films, the one that's closest to a Giallo is Until Death, which is one of the ones I did a commentary for. But the other 3 films are much more kind of tongue-in-cheek fantasy horror films. They're the types of films that were very popular in the 80s. They tend to revolve around teenage characters. They have a slight sort of Scooby-Doo vibe to them. Going to the mysterious old house or the castle on the hill and being menaced by vampires and ogres and various other creatures. I think they're all a lot of fun. Actually, I think all 4 of the films are. Until Death is actually the outlier of the film. That's of the set rather. That's a serious. It's kind of a supernatural version of The Postman Always Rings Twice. So if you're familiar with that story, you kind of have an idea of what to expect. It's the oddball film in that set because it's the serious one. And I was talking about Beatrice Cecchi before and the whole sort of sweaty atmosphere. This movie's got that too. It's set in sweltering Roman summer. It's very hot. And in more ways than one, because there's some sexual shenanigans going on there. But the other 3 films are more, I wouldn't necessarily say family friendly, but in a way, they're very tongue in cheek. They're not super gory, super nasty. They have monsters, they have elaborate prosthetic effects and things like that. But they're closer to something like Demons 2, I'd say, than Demons 1, if that helps.
Okay. Yeah, sure.
But Dinner with the Vampire was that when Eugenio let us know that this project was happening, that Cauldron was going to be doing these films, and we started talking about commentaries, I said, well, if I only get to do one, I want to do Dinner with a Vampire, which I think surprised him because I don't think he likes that one very much. But I said, I just have a fondness for that film. It has George Hilton playing a vampire. And Hilton gives off this wonderful kind of Christopher Lee as Dracula vibe in the film, which I just find, that's just my wheelhouse. So I said, if I'm only doing one, that's the one I want to do. But I ended up doing 2. So actually ended up doing the 2 I like the best out of the run. But the other 2 films are also, I think, very entertaining.
Awesome. I think this is, yes, as I said, it's released in April. It hasn't got a specific date. It just says should be available by April time. So something to look forward to in the, the first quarter of next year. Look forward to that one. Next up, something coming out a bit sooner. The Haunted House of Horror. This is from the Tigon line from 88 Films. I'm very not very well versed in the Tygon films. I mean, I've seen Witchfinder General and you know, things like that, but a lot of the ones that are being released I've never seen. Some of them I've heard, but most of them I haven't seen. So and one of my good friends, Davey, is a big fan of this line of films, and he's done reviews on them, and it sort of got me interested in them. And then I saw that you are doing an audio commentary on this one, so it got me more interested in it. So tell us a little bit about The Haunted House of Horror.
That's an interesting one. It has it's a little bit Giallo in some respects, but it also really anticipates the slasher films of the 1980s. It's a movie that has a tortuous production history. The director Michael Armstrong made this film when he was only in his 20s. He wrote and directed the film. It was one of those bizarre situations where Tygon made it, but then they involved American International Pictures, and American International said, well, let's get Boris Karloff involved in this. Oh, okay. Well, Boris Karloff's in a wheelchair with an oxygen tank. I mean, what are we going to do? So they create this character of a police inspector who's in a wheelchair. He was supposed to play a really significant role in the film, but Karloff was just basically at death's door. He couldn't do it. So they were kind of looking at other actors that they could bring in. And so they thought of the actor Dennis Price, who's like Karloff, one of my great favorite actors. Price was in kind of his seedy phase of his career. He's doing Jess Franco movies at this time. He had briefly been the biggest star in British cinema, did films like Kind Hearts and Coronets, which is a masterpiece. But at this stage, he's pretty much doing anything because he's an alcoholic and his big days are behind him and everything. So they decided to cast him in the part. And originally they were going to just have him do like Boris Karloff. So even though he was capable of walking, they were like, yeah, put you in a wheelchair. And it was just disastrous. The whole thing the whole thing with him had to be sort of reshot and by another director. The movie was taken out of Armstrong's hands, completely hacked and re-edited, and some really interesting ideas were dropped. He originally wanted to have David Bowie, pre-stardom David Bowie. This would have been before Bowie was really a big name. He was going to play a significant role in the film, but they said, no, let's get this other guy. And AIP brings in Frankie Avalon. And it's a weird film. It's very uneven, but if you stick with it, it ends up, I think, being quite an interesting film with some really brutal violence for the period. Armstrong was one of those guys like Michael Reeves, the director of Witchfinder General, who seemed like he was kind of shake things up in the British film industry, but his career did not go well. His next film was Mark of the Devil, the German film, which again was a very torturous production, taken away from him and changed in the editing. But I think Mark of the Devil turned out a lot closer to what he intended versus this film. But that's one of those things that makes for a really interesting film to talk about because of all the weird backstory and all of that sort of thing. So not the best film that Tygon made, but an interesting one to talk about.
Yeah, exactly what you just said. Like all that backstory stuff is can make a release for me, So this one, Venom. They're coming out March 25th. I haven't seen this one before, so I'm very excited to get my hands on it. I mean, the cast list is nuts. Very exciting, and I was reading the synopsis for it, and just the plot just sounds ludicrous and very fun. And yeah, you're doing a commentary on it as well. As you said, you have a very good relationship with Blue Underground, so it's a trio. It's the trio doing the commentary on this one. So yeah, tell us a bit about Venom.
I have a deep, unironic love for this film. It's a movie I first saw cut to bits on TV in the 80s. Not that it's a particularly gory film, it's not, but at that time they used to cut the damnedest things. So there's a lot of stuff in the movie that was severely truncated at the time. And then I hadn't seen it for a long time, and I kept reading what a lousy movie was, and I kept thinking, wow, that must be true. I mean, a lot of movies you see as a kid, you don't like much when you see when you're older. But then I did catch up with it eventually, and I said, I don't see it. I still think this is a fun movie. The plot is contrived, but it works well. You can't sneeze at a cast like that. Klaus Kinski, Oliver Reed, Sterling Hayden, Nicole Williamson, Sarah Miles. I mean, it's an amazing cast. And it was originally started by Tobe Hooper, who got fired or left, depending on which version you believe. We go into all this in the commentary, of course, but it was a movie where Oliver Reed and Klaus Kinski just hated each other's guts, which is
I
good
can
for
imagine.
good for the film
Yeah.
in terms of their chemistry on screen, but not good for the production. It made it total madhouse chaos, just lunacy. I wish there was behind the scenes footage of those two going at each other's throats, because it would have been fascinating to watch. And Sterling Hayden, who had used to have been a real hellraiser by this stage, was just kind of a, aging pothead who just kind of sat there and bemused watched what was going on. Nicole Williamson was also infamously difficult, Titanic drinker who kind of destroyed his career. But the director took over, Pierce Haggard. He took him aside when Haggard took over the first day and said, "You're going to have your hands full with those two, so I'll be good." And he was. Apparently, he behaved himself. Sarah Miles was another big personality as well. So he really had his handfuls on this film. It deals with a gang of kidnappers who decide to kidnap the young son of a very successful businessman, and everything goes wrong. And there's a black mamba snake which comes into the plot. It all sounds ridiculous, but it's based on a book by a South African writer. It's a pretty faithful adaptation of the book in a broad sense, although it changes some things, which we talk about in the commentary. But I love it. I mean, it's beautifully shot. It's got a great score by Michael Kamen. And really everybody in that film, as far as I'm concerned, is giving 100%. So nobody phones it in. Nobody is just kind of walking through it. I mean, Kinski and Reed really, they spark off each other.
Exciting. Yeah, I need to see this. I'm looking forward to getting that in the new year. Cool. Those are the ones I brought up that, just from quickly looking at what's coming out. Is there anything that you wanted to plug that you're working on, or any other releases that you're proud of that you've worked on that are coming out that have been announced already? That you can think of off the top of your head?
They recently recycled Nathaniel in my commentary for The Tenant, the Roman Polanski film. It came out through Vinegar Syndrome as a 4K. One of the films I'm proudest to have worked on. It's just a masterpiece, an incredible film. I'm a big Polanski fan, and actually with that in mind also, there was an Australian release from Imprint of Polanski's 90s films, including The Ninth Gate with Johnny Depp and Frank Langella, and Nathaniel and I did a commentary for that one. So that's in that box set. I actually don't know if that's still available or not. I think it sold pretty well, so I'm not sure. Importing stuff from Australia is very pricey though, so
it is.
Be aware. But proud to have worked on those as well. It's hard for me to remember. There's so many things you lose track of what's coming and what's been announced and what hasn't been announced. So I better avoid saying too much because I don't want to get into trouble for saying anything I shouldn't. But as far as books are concerned, I just recently had published a book called Innocence Lost, Robert Siegel and the Curse of Lorraine. Lorraine is a German horror film from 1989. It's a beautiful film that's not terribly well known. Really one of the best horror films of its period. And Robert Siegel, the director, has not had a very prosperous or happy career. Very nice man, though. And I was able to interview him and get all kinds of stories about his career. And so that book just came out. Hopefully people will find that of interest. And Eugenio and I are working on a project called Unsung Heroes, which is going to focus on directors who didn't have very prolific careers. So we each are writing about two different directors. I wrote about Massimo Dallamano and Vittorio Salerno, and Eugenio is writing about Franco Rossetti and Giulio Petroni. Petroni's actually his grandfather, so he has a great in there as far as information goes. And that will hopefully be finishing up here sometime soon. And I'm also planning a book on Alberto De Martino, another kind of journeyman filmmaker. I say journeyman not in a pejorative sense, but in the sense he was, one of those guys that pretty much went wherever the money was at the time in whatever genre. So, he dabbles in horror, he dabbles in peplums and westerns and all kinds of different things. So that also should be coming maybe next year.
Awesome. So before I sign off and everything, I just wanted to ask you about your process for writing books. Like, how do you, when you decide, yes, I want to write on this subject, do you have like a methodical planning period, or do you write things as they come to you? And like, how does the process work? 'Cause obviously different personalities and different, different brains work in different ways, and just maybe get tips and stuff on how you actually sit down and go through it. Cause I'm not a very good planner. I'm more of a throw everything at the wall to start with and then cut out loads of stuff but which may work, but then you're doing more work than you probably need to be.
Well, I mean, it's not for me to tell you whether that's right or wrong. If it works for you, it
Sure.
works for you. So my process, well, I just settle on the idea. There are a bunch of directors I'm thinking about doing books on. Eugenio is a great help to me in the sense he has access to a lot of people I don't have access to do interviews, which is very beneficial. So, we've talked about, well, maybe we should do one on this guy or this person or that person or whatever. So there's a bunch of things that are kind of milling around right now. But usually what happens is I decide, okay, this is what I'm going to do. And then I like to try to create, because there's nothing more intimidating than the blank page. You want to get something on the page. So what I like to do is a skeleton outline, sort of figure out how am I going to approach this? What's the structure going to be? Figure out, am I going to do interviews? In the case of DeMartino, I was able to get in touch with family members, his son, his daughter, and his granddaughter. So I was able to interview all of them. The interviews are already done, so that's very helpful. They were able to give me a lot of great insights into him as a person and his life and everything else. So this is all good material. And like a magpie, I just pull from the different books. Eugenio's books, Darkening the Italian Screen, Volume 1 and 2, very helpful. Various other books, magazines, things like that. What do I want? Pull certain quotes, pull certain bits of information, and just kind of create that structure. And then it's just basically, it's kind of like putting meat on the skeleton after that, once I finally sit down to start writing it. And at that time, a lot of it is also watching the films, taking notes, kind of figuring out what aspects I want to highlight, what things I want to discuss. Again, it's not my job to be a cheerleader. So when I do books like this, I'm not just interested in celebrating everything they do. I'll say, no, this movie doesn't work for me. This one, didn't work for whatever reason. But obviously, you're not just approaching it on the level of, I hate this guy's movies. Well, why would you want to do it?
Yeah, exactly.
You like them, but they're not all going to be great necessarily. So take my notes, and once I start on a project, once I decide, it's on, like, I'm very disciplined and very rigorous. I will do every day. I will write every day. That's how I'm able to be fairly quick. I don't know if that's a good thing or not. There's probably something to be said for taking your time. I don't think that I'm reckless or sloppy, although inevitably mistakes will sometimes seep through. There's information out there that's just not accurate, and you think it is, and you go with it, and it turns out years later, oh crap, that's not right. Well, it happens. I mean, books that have taken decades to write have all kinds of mistakes in them too. But you try to make it as accurate as possible. But the big thing for me is it's like I'm afraid if I stop, I'm not going to be able to pick it up again. So once the momentum gets going, it's just every day until it's done. And then from there, it's, you edit, you go back, you decide what's going to get chucked out, what I've changed my mind about, what I'm going to redo. I mean, that was one of the interesting things about doing the new version of the Bava book was that you're talking about a 10-year gap from the first volume to the second. And a lot of my opinions had changed. So I did change a lot of things in there. I was more sympathetic to certain films than I had been before. So that happens. Opinions change and views change, and that's as it should be. So yeah, it's pretty much just getting that skeletal structure in place. And then once you start just hammering away till you're done.
Awesome. Maybe I'll give it a go. Well, Troy, I just want to thank you for your time. It's been a pleasure having you on my channel, so we can, talk about you and your career and some wonderful films that you contributed towards. And hopefully people are interested in some of the things that I spotlighted and, your books and things like that. So yeah, thanks again. And yeah, if anyone has anything they want to say, please leave comments down below. And until next time, everyone, take care. Thanks,
Thank
Troy.
you.